Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us. You know those conversations that make your heart pound and your palms sweat? Yeah, the ones where the stakes are high and you just can't seem to find the right words.
We've all been there.
Today we're diving into Crucial Conversations, a book that's here to help us navigate those very situations.
That's right. It's packed with tools and strategies to help us speak up with confidence and respect, even when the pressure's on.
Because, let's be real, we've all had those moments where we say something we wish we could take back.
Absolutely.
Uh,
And those moments can really impact our relationships, both personally and professionally.
Crucial Conversations dives into creating a pool of shared meaning. So what exactly does that mean?
Think of it like this. Imagine a space where everyone involved in a conversation feels safe to openly share their thoughts and feelings without feeling judged or attacked.
Okay, so it's like building a foundation of trust and mutual understanding. Sounds great in theory, but how do we actually make that happen, especially when emotions are running high?
That's the million-dollar question. The book emphasizes this shift from a me versus you mentality to a we're in this together approach. It's about understanding that we each come to the table with our own perspectives and goals.
And sometimes those goals clash, which can make things feel like a competition.
Exactly. But the key is to not get stuck in that competitive mindset. The book encourages us to look for common ground, that pool of shared meaning, even when it feels elusive,
So how do we actually find that common ground?
by recognizing that we're ultimately striving for a positive outcome, even if we have different ideas about how to get there.
It's less about winning the argument and more about finding a solution that works for everyone involved.
Right. Crucial Conversations. Here's a really interesting story about an executive named Kevin, and it perfectly illustrates this point. Kevin's company is considering relocating offices.
Always a big decision.
Right. And in Kevin's case, the CEO is really gung-ho about a move that everyone else knows is a terrible idea.
Sounds like a classic case of a CEO prioritizing personal gain over the well-being of the employees.
It does, doesn't it? But here's the thing. Everyone in the room is afraid to speak up. Except for Kevin.
So Kevin's the brave soul who decides to address the elephant in the room.
Exactly. He knows he needs to say something, but he also wants to do it in a way that's respectful and constructive. He doesn't want to just attack the CEO.
That takes courage and tact. So how does he approach it?
Instead of directly confronting the CEO, he frames his concerns in a way that aligns with the company's values, which emphasize things like transparency and employee well-being.
Oh, smart. He's appealing to their shared values, creating that sense of unity.
Exactly. And guess what? The CEO actually listens. He realizes he's been so focused on his own agenda that he hasn't stopped to consider the bigger picture.
Wow, that's a powerful example of how open dialogue, even in a high-pressure situation, can lead to a much better outcome for everyone involved.
Right, and it underscores the potential consequences of what happens when we avoid those crucial conversations altogether.
Because when we let things fester, it can create a whole host of other problems.
Exactly. Crucial Conversations argues that avoiding difficult dialogues or handling them poorly can have this ripple effect on our lives, impacting our relationships, our well-being, even our success.
It's easy to see how that could happen when we're constantly tiptoeing around sensitive issues. It creates this undercurrent of tension and resentment.
Absolutely. In fact, the book gives examples of how this culture of silence in workplaces, where people are afraid to speak up, has actually contributed to serious mistakes, even medical errors.
That's a sobering thought.
It really highlights the importance of recognizing those moments when a casual conversation becomes crucial. Because if we're not aware of those shifts, we're more likely to react poorly.
So how do we know when a conversation has entered that high-stakes territory? What are some signs that we're headed into crucial conversation territory?
Well, our bodies are actually pretty good at giving us clues. Think about those physical reactions we often feel in these situations. Racing heart, sweaty palms, maybe even a little shaky.
Oh yeah, I know those feelings all too well. It's like our fight or flight response kicking in.
Exactly. Your brain perceives that challenging conversation as a threat, even if it's not a life or death situation. And when that happens, we tend to default to one of two extreme responses: silence or violence.
So we either clam up completely or come out swinging.
Pretty much. Silence is when we avoid the conversation altogether. We don't say anything, even though we're upset or disagree. We might tell ourselves we're keeping the peace, but we're often just letting resentment build.
Oh, the dreaded silent treatment. I think we've all been on the receiving end of that one at some point.
Right. And then there's violence, which isn't always physical, of course. It can manifest as yelling, aggression, but it can also show up as sarcasm, passive-aggressive comments, or even just cutting someone off mid-sentence.
So basically, it's any form of communication that's meant to control or punish the other person rather than engage in a healthy dialogue.
Right. And it's in those moments when we feel that surge of adrenaline and our instincts are urging us to fight or flee that we need to hit the pause button.
Easier said than done, right? So how do we do that? How do we interrupt those automatic responses and choose a different path?
That's where the strategies from Crucial Conversations come in. It's about becoming aware of those physical and emotional cues telling us that a conversation is becoming crucial, and then consciously choosing a more skillful and compassionate response.
So it's about recognizing our own patterns, those knee-jerk reactions that often sabotage us. Crucial Conversations refers to these as our style under stress, right?
Yeah, exactly. We can all identify with leaning towards one side or the other. Some of us shut down and avoid conflict, while others get defensive and go on the attack. The key is knowing our own tendencies so we can choose a better way to respond.
So self-awareness is key. We need to know our own kryptonite to avoid getting hijacked by our emotions in the heat of the moment.
Absolutely. And speaking of hijacked, one concept that the book introduces is that of a sucker's choice.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is a sucker's choice, and how does it show up in these conversations?
It's that little voice in our head saying, well, you can either be brutally honest and hurt their feelings or say nothing and feel resentful. Like it's a lose-lose situation.
Ugh, yes, I know that voice all too well. It's like being trapped between a rock and a hard place, where any choice you make seems wrong.
Crucial Conversations calls that a sucker's choice. It makes us think our only options are these two extremes, when there's always another way.
Okay, so there's a way out of that trap. Tell me more.
Definitely. The authors emphasize that there's always a third option, a way to be both honest and respectful. It's about addressing the issue without blowing up the relationship.
That makes sense, but finding that balance can feel impossible when you're in the thick of it. So how do we actually pull that off?
It starts with a mindset shift. Instead of seeing the conversation as a battle, we need to approach it as a team effort. Both people need to feel safe, sharing their thoughts, and working towards a solution that works for everyone.
So it's about finding that common ground we talked about, the pool of shared meaning.
Precisely. And Crucial Conversations provides a really useful framework for building that safe space. Mutual purpose and mutual respect. They're the foundation for any productive conversation, especially a crucial one.
Tell me more about these pillars of safety.
So mutual purpose, that's all about recognizing that even if you disagree on the approach, you probably share a common goal. It's about shifting from me versus you to us working together to solve this.
Like, hey, we're on the same team here, even if we have different ideas.
Exactly. It's about focusing on what unites you, not what divides you. And equally important is mutual respect. Communicating that you value the other person and their perspective, even when you don't agree.
Right, because the minute someone feels disrespected or dismissed, the conversation goes downhill, defenses go up, and it's hard to recover from that.
You hit the nail on the head. And the book uses a great example of a couple, Yvonne and Jotham, who are struggling to talk about, well, their intimacy.
Ooh, that's a tough one. Talk about a delicate subject.
Right. It's a perfect example of how quickly things can go wrong if those pillars of safety aren't there. In Yvonne and Jotham's case, Yvonne wants to be more physically intimate, but Jotham isn't into it and starts being sarcastic to avoid the conversation.
Oof. Yeah, I can see how that would backfire. Sarcasm is often a defense mechanism to avoid vulnerability.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Yvonne's feelings are hurt. She wants to respond defensively, maybe with sarcasm of her own, but she realizes that just escalating the conflict isn't going to help anyone.
That takes a lot of self-awareness to be able to hit the brakes when you're feeling emotionally triggered like that.
For sure. Instead, Yvonne takes a moment to collect herself and tries to rebuild that sense of safety. She reassures Jotham that she's not trying to change him or place blame, just figure out how to make things better for both of them.
She's tapping back into that mutual purpose, their shared desire for a fulfilling relationship.
Yes, and the book gives some really practical tools for rebuilding safety when things start to go sideways. One of the most powerful ones, a simple apology.
You mean admitting when we've messed up?
Exactly. It sounds so basic, but a sincere apology can really disarm a tense situation. It shows that we recognize we might have hurt someone, and that goes a long way in rebuilding respect.
It's about taking ownership, which can be hard, but so important for moving forward.
Right. And another useful tool is something called contrasting. This is where you clarify your intentions, especially if the other person has misunderstood you. It's like saying, hey, what I meant was this, not that.
So it's about bridging the gap between what you meant and what they heard.
Exactly. Make sure you're both on the same page. And then there's this handy acronym, CRIB. It stands for Commit, Recognize, Invent, and Brainstorm. It's a roadmap to finding that mutual purpose when it feels impossible.
Okay, I love a good acronym. Break down SREEB for us.
All right, so C, commit to finding a solution that works for everyone involved. Then we have R, recognize the other person's purpose. Put yourself in their shoes for a minute. What are their needs and motivations in this situation?
It's about empathy, seeing things from their perspective.
Exactly, and that's essential to move forward. Then comes I, invent a mutual purpose. This is where you get creative and search for that shared goal, that common ground, even if you disagree on the details.
So even if you have different approaches, you find a shared objective.
Yes. And finally, B, brainstorm ways to reach that shared goal. This is where you open up the floor to different ideas and solutions, working together to land on something that feels like a win-win.
This is such a practical framework. It gives you steps to take when a conversation starts going off the rails. But what about when we're the ones getting triggered? You know, someone says something that pushes our buttons and we feel those emotions bubbling up. What do we do then?
That's when understanding the path to action becomes super important. Crucial Conversations lays out this model that helps us understand how our thoughts, feelings, and actions all connect.
So it's like a map of what's happening inside our heads.
Exactly. It shows us that there's a step between an event and our reaction. We don't just automatically react. Our brain interprets what's happening and creates a story about it.
We're basically telling ourselves stories all the time without even realizing it.
That's it. And those stories, even if they're not accurate, are what drive our emotional responses and our actions. So if our brain tells us someone's trying to hurt us, we're going to get defensive, whether they meant to or not.
It's like that saying, we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. Our experiences shape how we see things.
Precisely. And to illustrate this, the book tells a story about Maria, who's feeling really frustrated with her coworker, Louis. She's convinced that he's trying to make her look bad at work.
Oh, I've been there. That feeling of being undermined by a coworker is awful.
The worst, right. But as Maria really looks at the situation, she realizes she's working with assumptions, not facts. She hasn't actually seen Louis do anything malicious. She's interpreting his actions through this lens of suspicion.
So she's letting her feelings dictate the story.
Yeah, and Crucial Conversations calls those clever stories, the ones we tell ourselves to justify our reactions without taking responsibility.
Okay, tell me more about these clever stories. What should we be on the lookout for?
Crucial Conversations talks about three main types: victim, villain, and helpless. And each one keeps us stuck in a cycle of negativity and prevents us from actually addressing the issue at hand.
Okay, so we're basically casting ourselves in these dramatic roles that don't actually serve us. Tell me more about each one.
Let's start with the victim story. This is where we play the innocent victim, completely blameless in whatever situation we're in.
Right, so it's that poor me attitude that keeps us stuck in a loop of resentment and self-pity.
Exactly. It's all about focusing on how we've been wronged instead of taking any responsibility for our own actions. And on the flip side, you have the villain story. This is where we make the other person out to be the bad guy, assuming they have bad intentions, even when we don't know for sure.
The blame game. It's always easier to point the finger at someone else than to look in the mirror.
It is, but it's not very productive. And finally, you have the helpless story. This one's all about feeling powerless. We convince ourselves there's nothing we can do to change the situation, so why even bother trying?
We basically give up before we even start.
Exactly. And while all three of these clever stories can be tempting to believe, they're traps that keep us from having healthy conversations and creating positive change.
So how do we break free from these negative narratives?
It starts with challenging the stories we're telling ourselves. Instead of just accepting them as truth, we need to pause and ask, is there actual evidence to support this? Could there be other explanations I haven't considered? Am I taking responsibility for my part in this?
So it's about bringing a more objective lens to the situation, especially when our emotions are running high.
Absolutely. The book encourages us to look for evidence that contradicts our assumptions, consider other perspectives, and focus on what we can control: our own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
Makes sense. Now, I'm curious, how does Crucial Conversations talk about handling criticism, when we're on the receiving end?
That's a great question. The book emphasizes approaching feedback with curiosity and openness. not defensiveness, even if it's hard to hear.
Definitely easier said than done. Our instinct is to put up walls when we feel attacked.
It is. But the book offers a really helpful acronym for staying open to feedback, even when it's tough. AMPP.
Okay, I'm all ears. What does AMPP stand for?
It stands for ask, mirror, paraphrase, and prime.
All right, let's break it down.
So A, ask. Start by showing genuine interest in understanding the other person's perspective. Even if you don't agree, try to see where they're coming from.
So instead of jumping to defend ourselves, we take a breath and try to understand their point of view.
Exactly. You might say something like, help me understand why you see it that way. Then you move to M, mirror. This is about reflecting back their emotions to show that you're really hearing them.
So we might say something like, it sounds like you're feeling really frustrated. Am I getting that right?
Perfect. It's about validating their feelings and creating space for them to open up. Then we have P, paraphrase.
Yeah.
You basically repeat back what you've heard, but in your own words, just to make sure you're both on the same page.
So it's about clarifying their message, making sure you're interpreting it correctly.
Exactly. You'd say, so you're saying you feel like your contributions haven't been acknowledged, is that right? And then the final P prime. Here, you offer a possible explanation for their feelings or behavior, but in a tentative way, not as a statement of fact.
You're helping them connect the dots between their emotions and what might be causing them.
Right. So you could say, it seems like you might be feeling overwhelmed with the workload lately, and that's adding to your frustration. Is that part of it?
That makes so much sense. So basically, by using AMTP, we create a safe space for the other person to share openly, even if it's difficult.
Yes. And once we understand their perspective, we can respond more constructively. And for that, the book gives us another helpful tool. Agree, build, compare.
Oh, tell me more about that.
All right, so A stands for agree. This doesn't necessarily mean agreeing with everything they've said, but finding those areas of common ground.
So you might say, I agree, we definitely need to find a better system for communication. Something like that.
Exactly. It sets a collaborative tone instead of a confrontational one. Then we have B, build. This is where you bring in your own perspective, but in a way that adds to what's already been said, not contradicts it.
So maybe you'd add, and to improve communication, I think we also need to clarify roles and responsibilities to avoid any confusion.
Exactly. You're contributing to the conversation constructively. Finally, we had C, compare. This is where you acknowledge differences in perspective without making the other person wrong.
It's about disagreeing respectfully.
Right. Exactly. You might say, I see it a little differently. While I agree communication is key, I think the root of the problem might be.
So you're offering your perspective as an alternative, not a contradiction.
Right. And by using this ABC method, agree, build, compare, you can handle even tough conversations in a way that feels more like teamwork than a battle.
This is so helpful. But we've talked a lot about communication. What about taking action? It's one thing to have these great conversations, but it's what we do with those conversations that really matters.
Absolutely. Crucial Conversations dedicates a good chunk to the importance of taking action and following through on commitments.
So it's not enough to just talk the talk. We have to walk the walk. Right.
Exactly. And it starts with figuring out how decisions will be made. Does this situation call for a team consensus? Or can it be decided individually? You need the right process for the situation.
Like choosing the right tool for the job.
Exactly. And once a decision is made, it's crucial to document it clearly. Who owns what are the deadlines, what are the next steps, and how will we hold each other accountable?
That makes sense. Without a plan, those great conversations can easily get lost in the day-to-day shuffle.
Absolutely. The book also offers a ton of useful tips for actually turning these skills into habits.
Yeah.
Practicing them in everyday conversations, talking about them with others to reinforce learning, and even creating visual reminders.
It's about weaving these principles into our daily lives, not just remembering them in the heat of the moment.
Exactly. What I find so powerful about Crucial Conversations is that it's about more than just practical tips. It really highlights the power of connection. It reminds us that even when we disagree, we can still find that common ground, respect each other, and work together to create something better.
It really is a testament to how skillful communication can transform our lives, both personally and professionally.
It really is. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought. Think back to a recent conversation that maybe didn't go so well. How could these principles, these tools, have helped you navigate it more effectively?
It's about taking these insights and applying them to those challenging conversations that are waiting for us in our own lives.
Absolutely. Because with effort and a little practice, Those crucial conversations can go from being sources of stress to opportunities for growth, connection, and positive change.
That's a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much for this incredibly insightful deep dive into crucial conversations. I feel so much more equipped to handle those challenging conversations with confidence.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having this conversation with me.